Hello, everybody. My name is Bruno, also known as Henrique. I'm a software developer at CodeMiner42, and I've been programming professionally since 2013, using mainly Java and JavaScript. Today, we will talk about end-to-end tests, specifically the challenges that we faced when migrating our tests from Selenium over to Cypress, and our solution that came in the form of the Glassworks framework. But for that, I'll try to give you an overview of the scenario we faced going in. When we first started the project, we already had several other projects using Selenium and an in-house solution for test monitoring and tooling. That solution provided a way to populate the test scenarios and creating or removing artifacts and was made accessible through an REST API. That meant that every test had to interact with this API in order to run. So with Selenium, things were quite straightforward. We didn't need to change much to get everything working. Promises and async await worked as usual, and the code was just a plain ES6 JavaScript, used some WebDriver libs. The part we wanted to keep from this was the organizational ones. We didn't fancy having all the possible behavior of each page just inside the test cases. For this reason, the Selenium tests used page objects. And page objects are basically a class that encapsulates all the details of a specific page of the application. Things like visit the page or click this button or write down in that input are methods of this class that will be instantiated inside the test suite. And needless to say, that is strongly related to object-oriented programming. And that is not a bad thing, but it didn't feel right to use page objects together with Cypress. And don't get me wrong, there is nothing bad about doing that, but I definitely got a bad feeling about this. Yeah, everybody knows the pain. So, how to improve on this? What could we do to have the same separation between the behavior of a given page of our application and the actual test code, allowing reusability while avoiding classes? What if we could just shatter the page little shards, every shard being as small as possible, to have just one thing happening in each one, and then gluing them back together on the way we want to perform some action on the application? So we went down this way, and can you guess the name of these atomic parts that would contain the behavior of each little part of the application? Shards. We actually go with shards. With that out of the way, we just needed to rewrite the page objects as shards and compose them together, right? Yeah, no. This was just the tip of the iceberg. We now need to tackle the misleading simplicity of the Cypress way. First of all, with Cypress, you are always dealing with two processes. One is the browser itself, and the other one is a Node.js process. And while they do talk to each other, there are some limitations to this communication. And Cypress's tasks are functions that run on the Node process, and commands run on the browser process. We just need to be aware that only browser-graded code can be run inside test cases or be declared as commands. So no file system, no path, or any other Node internal library, among other things. So let's focus on the browser process, okay? Cypress does everything it can to avoid the developer having to deal with a synchronous call. It goes as far as hiding the true async nature of all the calls that access the DOM. And it comes with trade-offs. It actually doesn't even support things like async await. Any async action has to be wrapped within the Cypress own async workflow. In some cases, it even warns us about mixing sync and async code, like in this case, where we have sync stuff and a side.get call in the mix, finishing with returning some constant value. It will throw an error telling us to wrap the result inside the side.then to avoid returning before the async code could finish running. So we would have something like this in order to use our test tooling. Here we have a call to an external service, and the result has to be wrapped with SciWrap. So we would be able to use the service data later on. It will act like a resolved promise. And this will become a pain to maintain if we need to interact with a bunch of external APIs. But what about if we run everything inside a chain of promises? So now we have this option where we keep returning promise after promise, and the code that handles the callback, it's more straightforward. And now the code base will quickly become a pain even to read. Imagine adding something. But we are forgetting about something. We are forgetting about the shards. They are small and predefined functions that we can use here. So let's take a look at how the shards can improve this. Now we have a create resource shard that calls the external API. We just map the return type to be an object containing the result under a service data key. And we have another shard that just does the assertion. Now we are getting somewhere, but the whole then thing is boring. But no problem, we can make it better. Here we just added a run chain function that will receive a list of shards to be read and chain them together. And this, my friends, was the icing on the cake. From this point going forward, we just needed to figure out some way of handling the context of each chain and decide how to name things. Yes, the naming was a particularly difficult, but let's take a look at the end result. We got some high order function to create shards. We have the shorthand shard definition. That's basically an error function. There are some differences regarding how the context is shared between these two ways of defining shards. It's an internal thing, so it don't comes to light now. But the backstage function is where we can pass a base context to all scenes performed. And yeah, we went on the drama side. We chose names that regard some theatrical stuff because we are dealing with scenarios, so why not? And the reset stage preserves only the base context. That's the one passed as the argument to the backstage function and adds any new props to it so it can be used later on by the scenes. We also can define a shard directly inside the scene, as is the case with that log statement there. Any props passed directly to a shard will take higher precedence over the context value of this given prop. And finally, the context will be passed as the first argument to all shards. And that's how we can have fully composable tests with fully reusable behavior. We can even reuse the composed scenes inside other scenes, like this. Here, the visit and click scene is being defined as a reusable scene and is called just as another shard inside the navigate scene. The context from the visit scene will be available inside the navigate scene. And this is another level of composability. We are able to reuse entire scenes. And if you follow me, the scenes are the way we define behavior, gluing together all those little shards. So we can have reusable, complex behavior, but we can have also the atomic parts that are the shards. Um, so we also have ways to divide different scenes to have them running in separate contexts, and the way to have a local shared context between independent scenes as well. And so here we create a new local context up here, and we always try to have a nice to read code, phrasing like then add to context is what we are aiming for when coming up with these things. In this case, the service data is stored in the local context and shared between the other scenes through the inject context function. And each scene will just have this part of the context shared between them, as the perform scenes function will actually run them inside a higher context that is provided with the backstage function, as we've seen before. And actually, that's all about how we created this micro framework to make our lives easier when dealing with Cypress tests and its nightmarish async workflow. The tooling also includes some functions to define tasks and make them easier to handle, and other nice little things like a Puppeteer adapter for automating stuff outside the current domain, which is a thing that Cypress doesn't let you do in case you are not aware. And that's it. I do hope everyone has enjoyed this brief overview. And stay home and be well, everybody.